All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, Francois, for this really kind introduction, and thanks everyone for being here. After Ali's inspiring talk, it's really exciting to now move on and hear from several of our professors and a lot of exciting work that they are doing, building on AI, leveraging AI, etc. So that's going to be the goal of this panel, and we will have time for questions at the end. So as you know, you hear from the panelists, start to think about questions that you would like to ask them. So we will have time for that. So I'm very happy to introduce our panelists. First we have David Baker, who's a professor in biochemistry and also the director of the Institute for Protein Design. We also have Cecilia Lee, professor in the UW Department of Ophthalmology. Radha Puvendran, who's a professor in electrical and computer engineering, and also the UW lead of a new AI institute on NSF, AI Institute on Cybersecurity. And Hannah Hajishirzi, who's an associate professor here in computer science and engineering, and also a senior research manager at the Allen Institute for AI. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here with us today. And maybe to get us started, it would be great if we could, go around and if each person could say, can you tell us about your research and just how your research is impactful on society? Ignoring AI for a second, unless that's the core of your research, really focusing on kind of the broad goals of what you're doing.
Yes, so we work on protein design. So proteins carry out all the important functions in living organisms, and they evolved to address the problems that were relevant during evolution. And we've learned now to make completely new proteins. And so because proteins can do, the potential of this is sort of highlighted by all the things that proteins do in nature. So the kinds of proteins we're trying to make are, for example, new medicines, new approaches to sustainability, carbon fixation, breaking down plastic, new diagnostics, and we're trying to work now on incorporating proteins with electronic devices. So that's sort of the general area. I just wanted to add a follow-up because I'm here to the excellent point that was just raised. We had a workshop on biosecurity at our Institute for Protein Design. We were asked by the Office of Science and Technology Policy, I think as a lead up to the executive order, to organize a summit because they wanted to know what to say in the executive order. So we had about 1/3 bioethicists, 1/3 designers, and 1/3 government people. And it was really interesting. All of the ethicists said, you've got to regulate. All of the scientists said, you've got to keep it open for safety. And I think the scientists won out. And I think the government left thinking that things should stay open. I was just thinking that maybe that's an important role for the university to bring scientists together and to convince, to make that point that we really are better off open. But it was really a stark contrast.
Hi, our lab research focuses on using the eye as a window of overall health to gain novel insights into major diseases. So some examples are predicting who will develop Alzheimer's disease or predicting who's going to progress in diabetes. Those are some of the examples.
So my lab works in AI and natural language processing. These days, mostly we work on understanding the science of language models. Why are they so good? And trying to build them from scratch and advance them, trying to close the gap between open language models, like we are working on open sourcing language models, and the current proprietary models.
Hi, our group works on security of network systems. Over the time, it evolved to security of AI that is being used to help out, and also AI for system security. So both sides of things we look at it. We also look at the infrastructure, large-scale cyber-enabled physical systems, where early work had depended on physics, which was nice, but there was only limited things you could do, protocol analysis. But later work has evolved to data, and some of the recent work has been completely on the data, where it was cyber system. There was no physics invariance or physics rules that would constrain us. So that these are different aspects of it. Putting it together would be looking at models and understanding the models, and then developing algorithms, and then providing guarantees, because the computing side, if you cannot guarantee, then that's a challenge. So this has been the problem overall that we work on.
Yeah, Thank you so much for those brief introductions. So now as a next step, it would be great to dive specifically into AI. How are you innovating in AI, leveraging AI? How has AI really changed the line of work that you're doing in your lab? So maybe you can go in the other direction. So maybe Radha, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so our initial work in the space came out very similar to, in a different direction, what David said. When the Google earlier put out the algorithms, Google Video Intelligence and the toxic comment detector and those things, we were asked to see if we can go after identifying the vulnerabilities. So we were not in that business in terms of modeling. We were looking at more of how do we understand and secure it. But we had a group of students who were willing to do that, and we started understanding the side channels there. But over the time, we have moved quite a bit away from that into the last work. What we did was getting all the data from the DARPA's transparent computing. This was purely large APT data sets, monstrous data sets, but they wanted to look at models which have nothing to do with physics coming into the model. So we were able to successfully get to that point. It's ransomware, all different kind of models. Moving into the current AI Institute, we were asked not to pay attention to the vulnerabilities of the AI, but look at how to use the AI for the enhancement of security in terms of tracing the paths and gathering information that will be more suitable for not develop product, but serve as kind of setup where attribute, all kind of other components from the system side to do. So where we are right now is we span from the tiny machine learning, as you would want to push everything into a little device to get things done, to the LLM vulnerabilities. These are what we have been actively working on.
So maybe just one quick follow-up question, because you mentioned that in the institute you're really looking at leveraging AI to help with cybersecurity and those aspects. So that seems to really tie into that question of openness and can we trust those AI models? And so what are your thoughts about that intersection?
Well, if you go to Google Video Intelligence, this is 17, right? The model we could only access through, if you would call it now prompt, that will be the entry point. However, the domain knowledge helps. So first deduction my student did was the following. If you are doing anything with the video, and it's a continuous time, and you're able to claim that you can actually compute fast, you're subsampling. So the next thing is that we know from the image processing, you have an initial frame, iframe, and then you're doing something. So he started with the iframe to see whether this is actually working very well. And they were able to very quickly get to the point where, although the video was some scenario, let's say Seattle, he was able to get the labels as OD, specific car of his, without having access to this black box model. Toxic comment was similar, but we were able to get access. So what the kind of work we have been doing lately is models come out, we don't have insight into it, but great faculty from other departments, CSE and others, come out and say, I violate the privacy, I can actually get the membership inference. So we asked the question, okay, this is great. Now, given this model, and I don't have any access post-deployment, is it possible for us to use algorithms that we have learned in our scenario to come up with reducing the adversary success rate to the baseline? I can put it this way, I can build a tool. But if you take that to the community, of the security community, they say, give me the proof. So there is that struggle between, because you are dealing with the black box models, you have the challenge to say, okay, here is what our randomization, here are my mechanism which will eventually work, I can put this tool out. The trade-off comes in the fact that you don't know the insight into it. You're actually using domain knowledge and other algorithms from all the good stuff you have learned over the time, from the data structures and algorithms. So that's where the bigger difficulty comes in. But then some of the algorithms that the domain experts can understand. In IS 95, long time ago, they've said that we have a magical cave algorithm. We would not reveal it to you because you haven't paid the membership fee. But then you look at this algorithm, this is for voice encryption. So those who, Mario Ostendorf or any of Hannah and others who do voice immediately know vocal tract is 12th order autoregressive model. Quickly they say, you don't need to give me the algorithm, I can tell you that you have a linear filter with 13 coefficients. And they think, how did you crack it? So domain knowledge helps a lot for our students not to use it as a black box. And I think that's where the strength comes from the university environment, where students have foundational material.
Thank you, super interesting. So Hannah, how about you?
My lab mostly works on pushing the boundaries of AI, pushing for a state-of-the-art in AI. And particularly, we are focused on, for example, what is the role of human feedback in improving, like you've probably heard the term reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? So how can we advance algorithms in those directions so that now we have better conversational agents? Or we have all these great conversational agents, but they are making a lot of factual mistakes or so-called hallucinations. How can we fix those issues, bringing in kind of grounded knowledge from like trusted sources? Or even understanding what is going on in all these gigantic neural networks or large language models. What is the role of data? What happened that now they are having these great capacities? And also, how can we increase the complexities and diversity of tasks that current models can address? And how can we even bring other modalities into current language models? Like, I can go on, so there are many different types of this type of question, but overall, like advancing the state of the art in mostly language models.
So I can tell you a little bit about the journey, our journey. So we used to do work on big data in healthcare using information primarily from electronic health records. But quickly, we realized that traditional statistical methods really had limitations because even just tiny little differences, even though they were not really clinically meaningful, resulted in very strong significance. But not only that, they were just too simple, and then they failed to capture very deeper patterns in the data. And once we started looking at medical imaging, then there were at that time just no methods in digesting that type of data. And we luckily had a contact at NVIDIA, and at that point, deep learning was just beginning to be popular. So then they overnighted Titan X from Taiwan. And 2 weeks later, we successfully trained our first deep learning model in our lab. And then afterwards, really the result was transformative. I think just the models to be able to learn end-to-end from data directly in medicine and in healthcare really enabled us to discover some new biomarkers or accelerate clinical trials, and then also discover new connections across the body, not just the eye, but really in human body. So now what we do is that we are focused on generating a multimodal atlas of human body by collecting and synthesizing all types of data to enable medical AI algorithms to be able to have a better understanding of this interplay that's happening among physiology, genetics, and the environment.
Yeah, well, my story is kind of similar. We about 4 years ago, we were exclusive. We spent many years developing and trying to model proteins, physical models. And so proteins are made out of thousands of atoms, which are all interacting with each other. So if you're trying to model that with a traditional scientific or physical model, you have to be able to model accurately all the forces between the atoms and be able to calculate how the system is going to move. For example, how the protein is going to fold up. And starting probably about 4 years ago, we got interested in deep learning models, and it's gotten to the point where in the course of one graduate student's time in the group, the physical models are almost completely supplanted now by deep learning models, and we can now the accuracy and robustness of the calculations have considerably increased. A couple of my more senior graduate students bemoan this the descent into models with hundreds of millions of parameters. But I'd like to tell them, you look at the course of human civilization, we had ancient Rome, Greece, China, you know, it's truth and beauty and everything was clear. And then we had the Dark Ages and it was all kind of magic and mysticism and stuff. And then after that, there was the Renaissance and all came back together. So maybe right now we're just a little bit in the Dark Ages, but the magic and mysticism works really, really well. Yeah, and I think it's basically because this sort of ties into the openness. I mean, the reason these models are, the models we've been able to develop and others have developed are so powerful is there's just so much data available that so many scientists spent so long to collect. There's hundreds of thousands of protein structures where we know the coordinates of each of thousands of atoms. So I think maybe, you know, so compute is a really important resource, but data is a really important resource too. So maybe a way of getting equality is to say, okay, well, the data, you know, if you want access to the data, you have to, I don't know, there has to be some sort of for compute. But anyway, so because of all the data, the models we can train are much more sophisticated than the physical models we had trained before, which had just a few parameters to describe every interaction. Now, you know, in the hundreds and millions of parameters in the network, you know, there are probably many, many dozens, and also much higher sort of multi-body effects are included. Anyway.
So I want to add one point here to what David mentioned about data. I was chatting with a few colleagues at like Meta, Google, and other places. All these people, when they have these large language models, they believe their success is because of the data that they have pre-trained their models on, and that is, like, they argue it's for the legal reasons and so on, we are not releasing it, but they told me that we have created this data, we don't want to release it, others will use it. So I would argue this is the role of universities and nonprofit to kind of collect this data, curate this data, and kind of advance this science on all these AI models.
And actually, that was going to be my directly follow-up question, because there is so much excitement in industry that some people question, like, so why are we still doing, you know, AI or any really research at university? Should we just all, like, you know, quit, get a job at Meta, and do our research there? So what is kind of, from your perspective, for the kind of work that you are doing, the importance of that university work as opposed to just the industry work that's happening, including often actually in new areas like in healthcare or, you know, in other areas? So I don't know if Anna, you want to start first, since you started going in that direction.
Sorry, yeah, I can mention a few points. So as you mentioned, a lot of research now is being done behind closed door in industry, but all of them are designed because of profit. And so this is one thing, and it's like now the claim is the bigger models, the better, more data, better. And we argue that they are not being scientifically studied. So this is one point. Second is we still see a lot of limitations. Like at the beginning when ChatGPT came out, everybody was excited. Still, we are all excited. But how do you actually use it? Like, would you even use it to write essays, answer questions, and so on? No, because you might use it to like edit some things, but you don't trust it, right? You are sure there are a lot of hallucinations, factual errors, and so on. So it means that these problems haven't been addressed yet, and there are still a lot of room to make improvements in the science of all these AI models. And if it is just being done in industry behind a closed door, we won't be able to even first figure out these solutions and then address it. Another point is about safety, which is we argue that we should not release these models because of safety and so on. But it's really important to really understand why these models do these things or have these behaviors. And unless you have full access to the full pipeline from the training stages, from the data, from all the parameters of the models, there is no way you can kind of make them safe, because it's not like, sure, a lot of randomness is happening and so on. A lot of things are in the parameters of the models. But still, if you start analyzing them scientifically, I would argue you would understand a lot. You can make all these models much safer. Like, you can have better checks and balances, better evaluation setups, and so on, once you have better understanding. Like, I can give you an example. Like, we've started training even like a large language model, even as much smaller compared to what Google or OpenAI has. Even at this scale, we've learned so much about what is the role of data, when it appears it's more important, or what is even the role of this tiny parameter in training. So all these are important, and we wouldn't have learned if we were not basically having access to the data and all these model parameters.
And I think that's a really good point, because part of the analogy is also, I think, from like olden days when we started having open source software, that when software is open source, everyone can study it,
Exactly.
everyone can try to attack it, everyone can try to really understand it. So I don't know, maybe Friday you have some thoughts about like the safety and like the importance of academic research and those.
Yeah, I think data is a very important point, but for a moment let's step away and ask the question that all the great academics here, my friends, many of them here, they are training their students and they are looking at the research, and question is this relevant? Yes, very much. Look at this. Ali put the curve up and said Hugging Face is going to have all the models, maybe your model, his model, everybody's model. Now these models are going to have third parties who are going to provide services for connecting. Who is checking those models? And if you go to the internet right now, you can get the prompt, you can buy the prompts, right? You can get the malicious prompts. You can get any prompt that you want for a price. And you can say your company is the best one by just paying a little bit of money and you are at the top, and I buy the prompts from you. Now going back, then ask the question that yes, maybe OpenAI and their chat box is going to take care of their part, but there are going to be so many other chat boxes which are going to feed into the LLMs. So the safety, not just from the LLM side, but also end-to-end service, what we have normally looked at is what is the old terminology used to be man in the middle, but let's say meat in the middle. This is jamming, all kind of attacks. Diffie-Hellman, when I was in Australia and my friends were somewhere else, we could easily connect key agreement. Man, with this meat in the middle, attack just busted it. So these third-party vendor services can have vulnerabilities because they are going to have to access other databases for providing your service. That can be vulnerable entry points. So we have two papers right now. One is actually taking, so if Google is there, prompt number 12 of our paper is for, so not Google, I'll back off, OpenAI. So prompt number 12, it gives you the backdoor entry for a Trojan. Everything else for general scenarios for other models. It's in NeurIPS, it's called bad chain. The next paper, what we looked at is LLM vulnerabilities, third-party vendors, software, what the challenges are. It could be insider, it could be accessed from the outside. So I do think that the universities have a very strong role to play in developing critical thinking. LLMs are their own services, that is fine, but I think the space is much larger for every, pie is large.
Great,
So
thank
that's
you.
what I think.
Thank you. And how about on the healthcare side? Because a lot of the companies are actually, they're jumping right in, right? And have been jumping right in.
Yeah, so I think sitting at the academic center, I think we're at the fortunately, we're at the crossroads between innovation and intellectual freedom. So especially in medicine and healthcare, I think that that component of intellectual freedom is critical to be able to push the science, even though those products may not end up being marketable. But it's just the new insights, novel insights that will kind of guide us or dictate the future exit or future trend in terms of developing new therapy. I think that's very critical. But I think also, I was thinking that an academic center like UW could partner with partners, with the community partners and industries in terms of developing those metrics of evaluating the performance of different models, because the UW could be like a third bystander, right? Or that could collaborate with everyone and then really develop those at-large applicable metrics. That's kind of what Ali brought up in terms of making this AI practice more trustworthy and ethical. And then I totally agree with him saying that it really has to be built upon this transparency along the entire life cycle of AI model development. And I think that we could play a big role in that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, well, I can give, I think, maybe a two-part answer to your question about whether universities should be pursuing this. I think if you go back 100 years ago, you could have said about science generally, should the federal government support scientific research? And you said, look, companies are going to do it all. They're these big companies. But I think companies have very different incentives, and if there hadn't been a big investment by the governments of the world in science, we'd be in a very different place now. So in my particular case, there are dozens of companies developing protein design software. None of it has been released. We're developing protein design software. We're making it freely available to everybody, and everyone around the world is using our software to design proteins. So if we weren't doing it, then the only people who would be able to be designing proteins would be companies, and they have a fairly narrow range of, first of all, you don't hear what's going on inside the company. My colleagues at DeepMind saying, yeah, we're doing stuff on protein design, but we can't tell you what it is, and we'll never tell anyone until we make a profit off of it. And so that if you just have private companies doing this stuff, first of all, I would argue in a field like protein design where it's so open-ended, they simply can't do as good a job, and the world can't really benefit from it because a company needs to make money in the end. So I think there's a really important role for universities.
Yeah, great, thank you. So all great points. So doing like super exciting research, very important, cannot be done by companies, right? Because of the different incentives and all these other factors. So the next question is, today, what are your greatest challenges? What is making it hard for you to pursue the kind of research that you're doing? Where are the gaps? And I don't know if maybe Cecilia want to start this time.
So I think we kind of touched upon many points, but again, really having access to the large, accessible medical data sets that are diverse enough and then that are harmonized, because nobody has a data set that is large enough. So we need to be able to pool, and that requires data sharing, but then also data standards and harmonization of the data set so it can quickly implement it in the training. The other challenge is this massive translational gap between where research is happening versus what is applicable in the real world. And then so we kind of talked about how it has to be more transparent and then openness, because all the trust come in play. But I think I don't think this translational gap between bench lab or any of the lab to clinical practice has ever been greater than now.
Yeah, let's see. Well, I think a lot of the things have already been discussed. I mean, compute is very important. Data is important. Students, people are really active in this area, and I think as universities do less in AI, there's maybe fewer people being trained who are interested in going into academic environments. And then I think there's a fundamentally really interesting problem. Which is a current research problem. Is something like my area, you can experiment. You can, for example, design proteins, make experimental measurements on them, and then feed back that experimental measurement to improve the model, very much like human feedback and reinforcement learning. And so, figuring out really how to do that well with experimental data, which is a little bit more expensive to collect, is a very interesting open research problem today.
Yeah, I want to really highlight the compute. So that's definitely limiting in industry, like in universities versus industry. Like I can give you some ballpark. We are operating at like tens of GPUs, like even like better labs, but like industry operates at like, I don't know, 10,000 or more GPUs, and like this scale is not even closely comparable. So we won't be able to push for big research, big innovative research these days if we do not have enough compute. I mean, I'm not saying 10,000, but at least it should meet somewhere in the middle, like not less than 500 or so at least.
I think compute is the number one challenge. So at some point we got NVIDIA stuff and set up 25 systems, and we were able to do DARPA's transparent computing problem on that system. They are sitting there, we can't use it with the LLMs. So we go to the online stuff, I pay for that. Now I reached out to the sponsor saying that, okay, we need this architecture to move forward. Otherwise, we are spending a lot of money to get the devices or compute time outside, which is unsustainable. So that's the bigger challenge. But at least we have some way to predict 2 to 3 years what we would need. And I'm having conversation back with DC people to get funding for that. But I think the compute is the biggest challenge. I mean, it's just the students shuffling between or cleaning up their stuff to let the other. It's really not market share, it's like the process sharing all time. There comes a point when the CPU and the entire system start thrashing. So that's where we are. Yeah.
Yeah, I even have some students who are amazing. They just want to go to industry, not to academia. They are telling me, we see how much you run after GPUs. We don't want to do that in our next position.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a really good point, right? So having access to compute, and we have the high cluster at the UW, but it's still, compared to what we need, very small. Like we really need to push, and the University of Washington really needs to invest in having significantly larger compute resources. Yes, if anyone has money in their pocket, yes, like yes.
Don't just raise these
Yes.
But it is that question. And so for the university and frankly the state to be competitive, it seems like this is an investment that needs to happen.
Yes.
I have no idea of the scale
Yep.
that would be appropriate, not for industry, apologies to industry, but for a university or facility. What is the scale we're talking about? How much?
So last night I was thinking that, yeah, the question was that, okay, you need computing. If somebody were to sit down with a paper and a checkbook, what is that they are going to have to think about? I was thinking about this question last night. If
I've got a checkbook.
no, not because you have a checkbook, but what is the fairness question here? Because I was thinking that Carl Boringer runs the WNF, which is a wonderful service, but I know that they also scavenge with some of the earlier devices, but it stretches over 10, 15 years. It will be very unfair for us to say that, hey, Babak is there, Tom is there, and all the great people are there, let's ask for some resources. Because this will go away in 3 years. We'll be complete, I mean, maybe even faster now. If I work on something, in 1 day or 1 week, the paper is out, somebody else. It's that fast. Earlier, we used to have time, I mean, many of the, I mean, including HANA, many of the NeurIPS submission group, you send the paper, earlier you would get the feedback and then you iterate. We don't do that anymore. We submit the paper, we are working before the feedback, anticipating of enormous amount of time, and then that is not enough. The competition is that high because people are on top of the game in a very different way. It's really very different thing. So to be honest, 3-4 years is at best from my perspective that you can support and then you have to redo it.
But in terms of dollar amounts,
Yeah,
dollar amount,
I-
well, let's see, 100 GPUs is about $1 million. So if you wanted 500, which I think would be great for the university, we're talking about 50 million.
We are just working on a proposal, like literally now. Like,
What did I get close?
it was okay, yeah.
I
Like
think
300 GPUs is.
Now we're talking 300. It changed from 500 earlier today to 300.
Okay, why
Yeah.
this? But what was your price?
But
Your
I
cost?
think we're in the like 20 million.
Okay, so we're in the same order, yeah. I'd say between 25, yeah. It's
But
not- the problem is for the whole university, you're going to be dividing it up. Like any one group would be great with, with a smaller amount, but if you're trying to serve the whole university.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you're talking,
We're talking about 25 million with a refresh rate of like 3 year. Yes. Okay.
Yes, will be
But that's-
yeah, I think that's
Exactly.
about right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That would be serving the breadth of need. That's the problem.
Yeah.
In other words, there are single groups that could swamp that.
You have to
And I
have an
think that's a
allocation
key
system.
question. So if I may add something, so HIAC today has about 600 GPUs already in it, except this is, and actually I don't know exactly the number. Do you know how many PIs?
I don't have the number, but I can send you later on. We're actually just doing the inventory right now.
But it's very large. I think only in the Allen School we have 30 PIs. 30 PIs on HIAC today, and HIAC has about 600 total. And there's other PIs from other departments, and we don't have the total number. So we currently are running at a very small number of GPUs per PI, which is really challenging. And if we think about the scale of the University of Washington, we have 4,000 faculty members. At 4,000 faculty members, assuming that some people, maybe in their line of work, they might never actually have this need, but still a large fraction of those 4,000 will have that need. A large fraction of those 4,000 who have that need, some will be doing research that, maybe is okay with a few GPUs. Maybe they can have access to a shared pool for their college or their department. But others, like, people sitting here, many people in the audience, and other people will need tens of GPUs for their own group, hundreds of GPUs for just the one research lab. And honestly, like our vision in the Allen School, we would love a world where each of these major AI research lab has access to 1,000 GPUs just for that lab.
Yeah.
So I would say 25 million is like a starting very, very low bar. That
Exactly.
I think that 50 million probably is a better aiming point. And maybe even higher. And also with the refresh rate, like we need to definitely, and we have to go fast. Because
Exactly.
one challenge is we cannot plan for, I need, that many GPUs in 5 years. In 5 years, the whole world will have changed. Yeah.
How that distribution goes, though, because there is sort of this longer tail of handfuls of GPUs, as we said, and once you get past a certain point, I think that the overhead of administering something on campus starts to become the bottleneck and the challenge, where we are able to spin up, and I've got students that barely know anything that are just starting out in this space that are able to spin stuff up on Google Cloud Platform and get access to GPUs and fine-tune models and sort of show that they can beat GPT-4, and the whole thing costs like $20, right? So there is sort of another avenue for quite a lot of research. So while I get the idea that some of us, probably the folks on the panel for sure, and probably some other people around that need access to thousands of GPUs, I guess I feel like it's a little bit simplistic to sort of say that we just need to buy all the GPUs in the world and put them on campus, and then everything will be better. Is that am I wrong-headed about that?
I have one quick answer to that. We need some GPUs, like physical GPUs on campus, because for many reasons. Like for example, we have access to like TPUs and so on. Like a lot of my students now learn how to use JAX, but it's very hard to get them, because a lot of those engineers and industry are also using their GPUs, and it's not like before that you say, okay, I have this much, like I have 50K Microsoft Azure credits, and I can easily use that. It's very hard to actually get GPUs on cloud as well.
Just out of curiosity, in the ideal world, if you had to pick between sort of building a cluster on campus and having maybe hundreds of GPUs or more, or you could have we have it's kind of a unique place that we have two hyperscalers local, they're here actually. The other option is to have like a preferential sort of arrangement with one or both of them that they would guarantee that you have access to substantial resources, but you don't have to build it on campus. Can you talk about pros and cons of each one of them? Like which one you would prefer? Because these companies have spent substantial amount of resources optimizing actually the cost of actually building these systems and running them. So there's a lot of know-how in these companies that probably may not be on campus at the moment to build large systems.
Yeah, I have some answers to that, sorry. We actually at AI2, we are using one of these companies that you are talking about. We are getting GPU allocation from those companies. Like we don't have any headache of maintenance and all those things, but the cost is much more expensive, for example, than how much I have paid for X number of GPUs on Hayek. But it's certainly much easier to use them.
Yeah, I would also add to that. So we were debating, maybe I had some cash to buy something. I said, for the time being, let's use outside, and then maybe I can talk to the sponsors to get at least competitive very quickly. So what happened was, in the meantime, the prices now go up because the demand is there. It's not static, right? Even companies, they know they are in the business of not charity. So it's not flat. So then it starts pinching even for just one work to be done. Oh, fine, there are a bunch of people in the lab, so it just adds up in a different way. Okay, you said this number, now number is different.
But I do think that we've talked about this before, there's an economy of scale, so it really doesn't make sense for universities or individual groups to be building things up. The reason why universities do is we estimate there's about a 7-fold markup if we go out on the cloud and buy compute compared to building here. So we build here, but from a top-down government country viewpoint, the cloud providers certainly can build more cheaply. Exactly. So maybe it's a matter of it's somehow resource allocation. Somehow, if the cloud providers could make available compute at cost, and then governments or funders could pay for it at cost. I think right now the problem is that the market rate is just so much. A factor of 7 is just really, really impossible to bridge. So so for bursty things like you described, where it totally cloud compute is great, and I think that's a really good point, that you don't need to worry about the 4,000 people. You just need the people who are going to be running 24/7.
Exactly.
But if you are running 24/7, either the fundamental economics of running on the cloud has to change due to some government, public-private partnership, or universities build their own. I mean, that's basically, we would go, we've even had very nice arrangements getting discounted time from, for example, AWS, but even that cost us more than building our own.
But that kind of advocacy is what I'd like to
Yeah.
push for.
Exactly.
I'm a little bit worried about getting universities together to say we're going to buy up all the GPUs and compete directly in market prices with people that we obviously can't compete with, as opposed to, argue with NSF and say, hey, look, you need to put pressure on them to allocate these things, because the rest of the infrastructure, I don't want to be in the business of building.
Well, but I think it has to work out for the companies too. I think NSF, NIH could make some arrangements where, I mean, the cost must. Wouldn't you think there has to be economies of scale? Wouldn't you think, Babak? I mean, the cost must be lower.
And I also think that kind of going back to this being really an investment, I don't think we need to plan out an investment for next 10 years, right? So let's say that we're gonna fundraise, and then we get large amount of GPUs. That's gonna be very helpful for next 3 years. Who knows afterwards? But then if we become the leader, we are more likely to get more government funding or more large partnerships with other agencies that would really put us on top. And then I'm thinking, but if we are still struggling just the compute time with the industries, and then we're just going to lag behind, and then that gap is going to be larger and larger.
And I think that's an important point, that we need to look and really push on all these different options, right?
Exactly.
So we want to have a strong cluster here that's going to be some reasonable size, right? I would love to see, I don't know, maybe so the technology changes, right? But let's say 50 million, 100 million investment on campus for something like that. At the same time, working with companies, at the same time pushing for like a national AI research resource. So I think we just cannot only rely on the cloud, because we have this need, and we have this need right now. And we have HIAC now. We just need to kind of invest in it to build it out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Xiaosong, you want to add something, since you're the Associate Vice Provost for Research Infrastructure.
Thank you very much. I don't have much to add, but just give everyone an idea. So for HIAC right now, we have 616, actually, I know the number, 616 GPUs. Most of them are A100. It costs us, in terms of raw investment, just the card itself is almost $4 million. And now we're talking about H100. We're still waiting for H100, but H200 is already announced. So H100 is $25,000 per card. And the performance is really awesome. So give us an idea, we can have a denser and computing cluster going forward. But if we all go all into H100, H200, really 50 million to 100 million is what we need to support the whole University of Washington AI mission. So we do have a really good system here. I hear a lot about Cloudburst, and I think we have a lot of the researchers use Cloudburst and directly use it through AWS and Azure. But we also actually, we actually did the same calculation, David, get the same answer. It's actually almost effective 7 to 8, cheaper, and if we use on-premises computing resource, GPU computing resources. There's one thing I think a lot of people don't know, and University of Washington actually does provide very strong support for to subsidize a lot of administrative cost of running on-premises computing through the indirect cost. So there's really strong support system at the University of Washington.
Great, thank you so much. And we have about 15 minutes left for the panel, so I want to make sure we have a chance to address other questions that the audience may have. So we're happy to open it up to other questions. I have plenty of other questions, but I'd love to hear from the audience.
So I might be missing something, but if you think about the discussion we just had, where industry has maybe a 3 orders of magnitude higher economic incentive and pool available for computing. Just look at just this one company, which has obviously been in the news a lot, OpenAI, where Microsoft has invested $10 billion largely in computing resources. Yes, at the jacked up 7x rates, but yes, still $10 billion. Is it even reasonable to expect that there is any math where that amount of money can be competed with by even government funding? Like NSF, let's say in your wildest dreams you get $1 billion, maybe $2 billion. Okay, that's still a fraction of what one company gets as an investment. So I guess my question is, rather than saying, hey, look, the competition is based on availability of commodity computing resources, is there a different angle in terms of IP or IQ or some sort of innovation which creates the right incentive for industry to fund the computing required? Because right now there's a closed ecosystem where Microsoft expects to monetize their co-pilots by tens of billions of dollars in profit, and therefore they have a very strong incentive to keep funding this and keeping the ecosystem closed.
Good question.
Okay, go ahead.
I have one answer here, which is I don't think we want to compete in terms of like, okay, I have the larger model now, University of Washington's model is larger than OpenAI. It's more like competing in terms of innovation, meaning that now I've learned about what caused this particular thing happening and how I could improve it. It should, and based on a lot of recent findings, you don't need to be, for example, that gigantic model where the size is not being mentioned anymore, right? A lot of those things can be transferred at the smaller scale. And again, everybody is just pushing for increasing size, more money. And that $1 billion that you are mentioning, it's not just for compute, it's for like buying data, paying people to annotate data and so on. But there are other ways that you can probably more cheaply collect data, right? So all this is more like competing in terms of innovation and pushing the boundary of innovation rather than like, okay, that outcome, that product, now UW has a better product.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I don't want the message to be that we need to only have one end of the spectrum. So initially I was saying that we look at from the TinyML, which is at the edge side, to LLM research. And so a lot of it, as earlier mentioned, we are smart enough to work with almost nothing and still be creative. So a lot of students are very clever about this. I mean, if you go to automotive or other sectors, we are not going to plug in very huge computing. You're going to have actually really thin devices, but it's super intelligent enough. So the students are going to then work through very different domain. So it's not complaining about the industry by any means. It's a spectrum of things. And as pointed out earlier very well, the usage of the computing also will not be only high because right now that's where the hype is. That's not at all the case. In fact, my initial moving towards the tiny devices started with when Babak was at Amazon. I said, oh, can you help us with some of your security people? And they came and talked to, and they said, oh, we can give you IoT material. You can translate. It took us a while to get these tiny machine learning things where large systems are there, but push it so the students actually get out every class. They finish one application completely. And this is not even Raspberry Pi, it's way beyond, so that they get really frustrated, nothing works. They need to make it work in the 4-hour evening class that when they get out. So there is that notion of be creative. So I think that is going to remain the fundamental for the universities, and then partner with the companies.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? I think I saw Andy.
This has been a really great discussion. We've talked a lot about computing, we've talked a lot about data. We haven't really talked about people. And I was wondering, are you seeing, particularly in such a rapidly developing community, are you actually, or field, are you seeing challenges in terms of training the students, the postdocs, retraining postdocs to be able to be successful in this space, and particularly maybe from those who don't necessarily come from a CS background? Do we have a bottleneck there as well as a university?
Absolutely. So especially in medicine, because the doctors or medical residents usually don't have that kind of CS experience, it has been really hard to recruit people, and then that kind of gets down to this this fear and not being able to trust the AI models, as medical doctors when they just kind of spit out the results out of black box. And then also for our lab, it has been really hard to recruit people, postdocs or PhDs that are coming out, and then their salary is 2-3 times higher than ours. So retaining those kind of people and then making sure that we educate the next generation of scientists and medical doctors who can sit into intersection between computer science and medicine. That has been really hard. And I do think that University of Washington can definitely play a role. And then again, this partnership with industries and UW can really, really play an important role in that.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pivot a little bit because time is going to be done. So when we, a few years ago, were looking to start new things with the devices and neuroscience and computing, there was a lot of question about where do we go and get the resources and get brilliant faculty members like Amy, Azadeh, all kind of faculty members. So leadership from Raj Rao, who was in the computer science ERC, just pulled in everyone together. I don't know how many times Tom and I sat with him, or we sat with Tom to get help, even Adrian, otherwise we couldn't have recruited. So you asked about people. I just want to go back to Ali's diagram about he had the diagram with all other areas, and I see clean energy, I see UWIN, I see some other things which I don't see very well, maybe technology policy lab from other friends who have funded it. But this is also a time where we can look at the people. Our people are intellectual, but they collaborate. So there are many other opportunities beyond clean energy that we could think about. This is the time for us to probably look at, and I would, because the big guy with the big check is here, I shouldn't say that way, but I will challenge you to be more open to write more checks to build UWIN kind of institute. Will pull others together for future of innovation, right? I mean, this, I would say that in just looking at here, the trees are there, the water is there, the agriculture is there, climate, space, IoT, this can be another domain for looking at a center, not just the technology and policy. Yes, that is great. Let them fight out. Eventually they will figure it out. But there are opportunities in this domain. Space is one of the bigger domain. I think, again, going back to neuroscience, this is a fantastic opportunity, and computing leadership is here very much. If we can pull and go back and say, you win part 2, that'll be really good. Adrian is here, all the right people are here. So beyond compute and beyond clean energy, there are things that leadership is very much here. Babak and others are there. They can have this conversation to shape what the future is.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Yeah, this is actually just a proposed framework, because I kind of, when I think about our compute needs on campus, which are pretty substantial, and you mentioned the order of magnitude difference, like 3 orders of 4 or 4 orders of magnitude difference between industry and academia right now. This actually reminds me of what happened to semiconductors and clean rooms. It's actually very similar. If I go back 30 years, the kind of facilities that we had on campus to make semiconductor devices were actually quite competitive with what was going on in industry. But over time, industry sort of exponentially sort of went off, and the cost of building these facilities went totally crazy and got to $1 billion. Now it's actually multiple $1 billion to make a single-digit nanometer line, the kind that TSMC runs. So there's no university that would ever spend $10 billion building a lab. It doesn't mean that semiconductors just disappeared from universities, but it did require universities to think differently about what is it that we're building on campus. We still have clean rooms on campus. We still train people on campus, and we do amazing research on, in here and many other universities that relate to semiconductors. But we don't spend $10 billion competing with industry building a 3 nanometer or 5 nanometer fab. So actually, I really like your point of probably we should think about this differently. I encourage us to think about what happened to semiconductors. Maybe there's some lessons there for us to learn.
Thank you. Any comments on this? Or? Okay, I think Adrian.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the comments that you made just now on the role of academic research in this field. And I do think that the interface between neuroscience and AI is just a super important one. My husband's at Google. this is what he thinks about all the time. He's collaborating constantly with neuroscientists, computational neuroscientists here and elsewhere, in order to solve some of the problems of compute, right? Google doesn't want to spend so much money on computing either, right? They'd like to find ways to compute much more efficiently. And this is where academic research is really kind of leading the way, because we have the insights into how brains work. We can drill into the algorithms that brains work in order to do these things efficiently. Just wanted to also just share an anecdote from about our role as educators. I just came back from Stanford, and I had dinner with a Stanford professor whose son is here at UW as a CS student. And she said, you know, he was talking to friends of his who are studying at Stanford, and he said, oh, he's up all night, you know, coding. And his Stanford friends have said, well, we don't actually have to code. You know, we just have to get the gist of the algorithm. And I think UW is doing a fantastic job of turning out students who are spending 4 hours, right, figuring out how to get that app actually encoded. So I really want to congratulate, you know, UW in turning out functional people that industry wants to hire. So anyway.
Okay, yes, thank you. So maybe one last comment or question.
Yeah, maybe it's just, so going back to your point on medical, so I run State Association for Life Science, and I'm always struck that, I mean, on the tech side, I mean, Google, Meta, Amazon, great relationships. We've got the highest density of companies working in that cross-section between IT and life science, anywhere maybe except the Valley, and maybe even ahead of that. But when I talk to our members and say, you know, their top thing is, I need an AI strategy, and then I say, who are you working with? And then it gets really quiet. It's not clear to me that we've built the really strong relationships within the Seattle community outside of tech, so that, you know, any company knows, hey, here's the person to go to for that problem. Who do I collaborate with this? And it seems to me if we did that well, I mean, I used to work in a national lab. I mean, a $50 million, you know, national user facility infrastructure is frankly not that expensive if you've really got a major cluster that benefits from it. I've got to believe other academic centers, I mean, I don't know whether it's NSF, NIH, DARPA, others, are they not funding stuff at that level? Because I mean, that seems like if it really is a big consortia solving big problems, that wouldn't be that big of an ask.
Great, thank you. So maybe we're about out of time, so maybe giving our panelists a chance to have some final remarks. Cecilia, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. I was just talking to Robert, and then he's, you know, creating models to predict disease progression, and I was like, what did I not know about that? And so I think just kind of understanding who's playing, and then especially in medicine and healthcare field, even in Seattle area would be really helpful. I was thinking that this crazy moonshot idea is, you know, can we create some co-pilot for doctors where we can synthesize and summarize all the medical data that exists on that patient specifically, and that could be available tomorrow. We don't need the regulation or nothing, but we could really leverage, and then that could you know, lead to tremendous marketable products as well, and then make a big difference. Just the way we approach our patients, and then just the way we approach health. So I'll just put that out there.
Anna, any final remark?
Yeah, not much more to add what everyone said. So thanks a lot for inviting me in this panel. I enjoyed it.
Awesome, thank you. Radha, any final thoughts?
I think for the security, it's always an arm race because it's puzzle solving from both sides. Adversary side, they are looking at your system and saying that what are your entry points that I can go into and get into the system. So that's not going to go away. But we have to think about differently and creatively. And thank you so much for inviting me to the panel. And Francois, thank you again.
Great, yes, and thank you so much to our panelists. Great, so thanks to our panelists, thanks for everyone for the great comments and questions, and I'll hand it over to our host.